We're rolling into week 10. We're about to set our lineups, and some of us are hurting. We're looking for players to put into that flex spot. We're looking to make some DFS lineups, and we need some cheap options. Well, I'm here for you today because I'm going to give you 13 players that are not obvious starts that you can gamble on in your lineups. And what I'm doing is going game by game, looking at the game script or the potential game script from what Vegas is telling us, looking at last 3 weeks' numbers or some previous numbers, and giving you a random guy from that game that could potentially hit. Not all of them are going to hit, not all of them I like, but this is kind of an exercise to do to try to find those outlier players that could be on the waiver wire, that could be dirt cheap in DFS, that you could use this week. You never know, one of these guys could be $1 million player for you, and it also gives you some process to help you going forward when it comes to looking for these players. And if this is something you're interested in, let me know. Smash that like button, hit that subscribe button so I know to keep putting out this content, because this is something new. I'm reaching out on this just to see if it works for you guys. But let's go ahead and start with the first player that we're looking at as a start. And we're looking at the Seattle and Tampa Bay game here. 44.5 over under. Very interesting matchup here. Tampa Bay's been off and on all season. Seattle's been a surprise. Decent over under. Kind of low, but the unders have been hitting this year. So the over-unders are starting to get a little lower as we get deeper into the season. The player I've been looking at, and an ancillary player here that you may or may not be starting this week, and I know some people are because they mentioned it out to me, and that's Rachaad White. This is going to be a tight spread. He's had 25 touches over the last 3 weeks. Third most in this game. Out of all the players in this game, he's had the third most touches in the last 3 weeks. Seattle defense is allowing 140 rushing yards per game. Leonard Fournette has not been very efficient lately, and this could be an opportunity for Rachaad White to produce, get some workload, and if you're going to start him, if you have to start him, because some of you have to, you got bye weeks, injuries, and all that stuff, this might be the game to do so. Looking at the spread here. Moving on to our next contest, we're looking at Cleveland at Miami. Miami's been on fire. They can move the ball. Tua's looking good. Cleveland has been up and down all season, but they have some positive stuff in their game. We got a high over-under here at 49. One of the highest on the slate. They're expecting a shootout here because Miami can push the pace. Looking for an ancillary jabroni from this game that we can put in our lineups is a guy that is kind of obvious, kind of not so obvious, but I'm all over the board here with these players, and I just want to highlight Jeff Wilson. 12 touches last week, 16.2 fantasy points, hot hand right now. Browns are allowing 120 rushing yards per game. They are tougher against the pass, so this could be a little bit of a run funnel here for Miami, especially since they can spread it around a little bit. They got the deep speed. This could allow for Wilson to get some opportunities. Also, he hit last week, so he may not hit in back-to-back weeks. Think of it in those terms. But if you're going to pick an ancillary player to lean on, Jeff Wilson could be your guy. Roll into our next matchup here, and it's an ugly one. I'm surprised it's not a Thursday night game for that matter. And we're looking at the Denver Broncos versus the Tennessee Titans. We got a 37.5 over-under, and going to be a slow-paced, ugly, scoring game. But one player I'm looking at, mainly due to his position, and at his position, there's not many hits on a weekly basis. I'm looking at Greg Dulcich. And the reason why I'm looking at him, 1, tight end position. 2, leads the Broncos with 10 targets in the last 3 weeks. Tennessee allows 254 passing yards per game, and they're stout against the run, which could create a pass funnel. And if there's a pass funnel, then targets should be going to the pass catchers, and Greg Dulcich leading the team in targets. Tight end position, everybody needs a tight end. Could be rostered, could not be rostered. He's on the fringe there depending on your league. Could be a chance for you to pick him up if you need a tight end. If he doesn't hit, the thing about tight ends though, the tight end 25 versus the tight end like 12, 10, 11, usually the difference between them is like 4 fantasy points. So you're either going hard or going home with these tight ends here. So Greg Dulcich is not a bad look if you're needing a tight end. This one's a fun one. a very fun one. We have Detroit at Chicago, the Lions versus Bears, a divisional rivalry, 48.5 over under, one of the highest on the slate. Bears have been kicking into gear lately, kind of underrated, and the Lions have known to be pass happy during the season. A player here that you can look at that no one's really thinking about. I've heard him mentioned a couple times, but he's more like a DFS play that you throw in your lineups and hope he hits due to the matchup here, due to his price. But also in redraft, if you need a wide receiver, this guy could help you out because he does have some potential. I'm talking about Khalif Raymond. Just keeping it not so obvious with him. 11 catches his last 3 games, 168 yards, 121 air yards. Just enough workload to keep it going. He's a field stretcher. He gets downfield. He'll get deep targets. Against the Bears, who are 5th against the pass, means maybe since he's an ancillary piece in the passing offense, maybe they go to the other option called Khalif Raymond. Maybe they got to check some targets to him, throw it deep down to him. Maybe he reels in 1 or 2. Maybe he gets you that big game. Big risk, but everybody on this list is a big risk. These are not so obvious starts that you're just plugging in, closing your eyes, and hoping things go right. And for this next player, we're doing the same exact thing here, and we're just reading the tea leaves, and we're looking at this Houston at New York Giants game here, 41 over under, ugly contest, which means we might get some ugly results here from a fantasy football perspective. But I want to highlight Brevin Jordan. He hasn't really been active for much this season, was dealing with injuries, 10 targets in his last 3 games. Brandon Cooks has been quite quitting as of late. Nico Collins nursing the injury. Time for him to get his opportunity. Can he get workload by default? We don't know. Am I banking on this? No. If you're in a 14, 16, 20 team league, you need a tight end. You're hurting. You might even just have to throw him in. If you're looking for a cheap tight end and you're hoping for a cheap, trendy DFS play, you might want to think about Brandon Jordan, but not really a guy I'm too in love with either. You kind of just got to pick somebody from some of these matchups. Next game we're looking at here that is very impactful. One of the most high-powered games on the slate. We're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Kansas City Chiefs. 50.5 over under. Something you want in a contest. This is something where you definitely want to look at those ancillary receivers, those wide receiver 2s, those wide receiver 3s and 4s and so forth. Here we're going to look at Marvin Jones, 218 air yards in his last 3 games on 9 targets, getting deep balls. Deep balls that convert equals a lot of fantasy points. So if he catches 2 of those, you know you're going to get double digits from a PPR perspective, especially if he hits the end zone. But he's getting deep balls. It's going to be a high-powered game. This is an option that you could throw in your lineups, especially if you're hurting. You need a flex. You need something. You're putting together a DFS lineup. Marvin Jones is a guy you could look at. This is expected to be a high-scoring game. Vegas is telling us that. Marvin Jones is getting air yards and some targets. Not the most reliable thing because it's not gangbusters with the targets and the target share. But those deep targets, if we hit on that, that could be money. So that's something you want to look at in the process here. Going to another game that you would expect to be projected with a higher point total, but we got some injury issues, which we might be able to capitalize off of. We're looking at the Minnesota Vikings at the Buffalo Bills. 43.5 over under. Josh Allen with the injury. A lot of things up in the air here. Focusing on the injury and with Minnesota being a little bit of a pass funnel, not much, but a little bit, there's a chance we could see something out of Nyheim Hines here. I'm not projecting it. I'm not predicting it. But if I have to gamble, if I have to throw somebody in and I'm hurting, you may want to think about it. Or from a DFS scenario in these large tournaments. Because Buffalo's going to want to throw the ball a little bit. And you got a pass-catching running back. He's been with the team for a little bit, so he's got to have some packages, a large portion of the playbook, if not larger than last time. Could see some checkdowns. We don't know what's going on at the quarterback situation, so those low, short, acuity targets could be going to him. That could mount up, or it could be a huge bust on us. But the thing is, we're only doing it because it's on the cheap and we're hurting at some positions. It's not a guaranteed thing. Moving on to our next matchup here. And this one I had to build a little narrative on. It's not very analytical, more anecdotal. But looking at the New Orleans Saints at the Pittsburgh Steelers, we got a 40 over under. Could be a very ugly game. Could be nasty. Probably some of these wide receivers are going to hit on us, but they're kind of guys that are obvious, and we're going for the not so obvious. Remember that as we're touting or looking at or talking about these players. So I had to think. I had a galaxy bring this up. And the player I decided to think of as a not so obvious start is Taysom Hill at tight end. 16 touches in his last 3 games. We're looking at an ugly game here, which means they might have to spread out this playbook a little bit. When you count on him, he's not there. When you forget about him, that's when he starts to produce. Is he guaranteed? He never is. He just shows up some weeks. If you're going to think of him showing up on any week, it's the week that you're just forgotten about him. That's why I'm bringing him up. If you want something to gamble on, there's an idea for you. And I got another idea for you on this next contest. We're going to be looking at the Indianapolis Colts at the Raiders. And we've had some new information come our way. And I really just want to highlight this player. 41.5 over under. Another ugly contest. A lot of these games are supposed to be ugly. So some of these are going to be hitting the overs. And some of these are going to be on the unders. Because the unders have been hitting more this year. It's been a weird trend. But we're looking at Mac Hollins. Hunter Renfrow out for the season. But Hollins has seen 15 targets in his last 3 games. He's had his moments this year. He has been productive in a sporadic fashion, which is what you want in a list like this. Not so obvious starts. You want guys who hit sporadically, because if they're hitting all the time, then they're obvious starts. But if they're hitting sporadically, that means they're already letting you know, like, hey, I get the chance to hit. Mac Hollins is telling us that. We're also playing the Colts 8th in the league against the pass, which means they could be a little tougher on Davante Adams, tougher on some other guys in the passing game. Maybe since he's got an ancillary role in the passing offense, maybe a couple extra targets might go to him as the quarterback has to check it down. We're not really banking on any of these players. I'm just throwing that in just about with every other guy here because I have to remind you what we're looking at. But Mac Hollins might be a guy in for some bigger games here down the stretch, considering the matchups, considering what's going on in his situation. Going on is another situation here. We're moving on to another game here, which is very important. This one's very interesting because of last week's trend. We're looking at the Arizona Cardinals at the LA Rams. 40.5 over under. Notice the trends on these over unders versus how they were earlier in the season. Unders have been hitting all year long, so expect some of these overs to hit in some of these weeks. I just expect it. It's just volatility in the system. But we're going to focus on Van Jefferson. He's back. He's healthy. Last week he saw 5 targets. Not only did he saw 5 targets, he had 134 air yards. Getting those deep targets. If we're looking for ancillary players, random players to gamble on, we want guys getting some targets, some kind of workload, and then also getting those deep targets. Because if they're not getting targeted 10 times a game and they're only seeing like 5, 6, 7 targets a game or less, then you want them to get targeted downfield, because if they reel in 2 or 3 of those targets, that could still be a productive week for you, if not a huge week, if those are deep balls that land in the end zone or like a 60-yard catch or whatever it is, but it gives you more opportunity. Van Jefferson has a small sample size of workload here. Also an indicator that the Rams are trying to mix things up a little bit with some of these players. Not all these players I'm bringing up I absolutely love. It's not because of that. It's because of me galaxy braining, trying to think, trying to read the tea leaves, trying to think of those players that just come out of nowhere and hit. So more likely, probably about 25% of this list will be productive, fantasy relevant. But when you're hurting, or when you're trying to sneak away a tournament in DFS or whatever, you really got to look at those contrarian options. We got one here, Dallas at Green Bay, 43 over under. And the thing I'm focusing on here is Aaron Jones, probable with an ankle injury. Actually, I think if he's on the field, he's going to get touches, he's going to get work. But also, just because I feel that way doesn't mean it's going to be correct. So A.J. Dillon had 28 touches in his last 3 games. Dallas is allowing 135 rushing yards on the ground each game. However, Dallas is a stout defense. But since we're just throwing up players that are not so obvious, A.J. Dillon could have his turnaround game. I'm not banking on it. I'm really not telling you to start him. He's probably like a top 40, top 50. I haven't done my rankings yet, but he's a guy that not many people in basic redraft leagues will want to start. He's probably on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues, but he's a guy, though, that if anyone's going to surprise us, and if he's going to have a productive game, it might be in this situation. I'm just not going to bet on it, though. Moving on to this next contest, very fun matchup here. Sunday night, Chargers at the 49ers. 45.5 over under. And the Chargers is known for kicking that ball downfield in the passing game. We have a lot of ancillary pass catchers. We have a lot of injuries in the receiving game. DeAndre Carter is a guy that we could be looking at this week. 13 targets and 92 routes in his last 3 weeks. That's a lot of workload here. 46 routes per game, 8.5 points per game. Workload high, points low against a tough defense. So that means since he's an ancillary guy in the passing offense, maybe something gets funneled to him. Maybe. You don't bet on it. You don't want to, but we're not betting on any of these guys anyways. DeAndre Carter in a good passing offense, getting workload against a tough defense, which you wouldn't bet on, but since he's like the number 2, 3 option or whatever you want to call it here, there's a chance something gets funneled to him, and you might be able to catch something off a couple catches here. The last one, the Monday night game here, Washington Commanders at the Philadelphia Eagles. 44 over under. And here's this guy might be startable for a lot of people, but again, like I say, I like to be all over the place. That way I can help a little bit of everybody. Devonta Smith, off and on this season. He's had, 4 or 5 wide receiver 1 weeks on his career, and that's on like 25, 26 games. 12 catches in his last 3 games. Washington 16th against the pass. So this is a very interesting matchup. Also on Monday night, he's due, and honestly, there's a lot of players in this game that may be ugly for us in fantasy, especially on the Washington side, as we're dealing with this quarterback situation. So I really want to give you a guy that might help you, that at least has some sort of chance. Devonta Smith has that. If he's on your team, you're thinking about him right now. Thing is, not every game's going to be an A.J. Brown game. Sometimes they're going to double cover him, have him shadowed up, and then Devonta Smith's just soaking in targets underneath. He's going to have those pop-off games because Devonta Smith's good in his own right. He's solid in his own right. He's just not A.J. Brown. So Devonta Smith's going to have this time here and there. It's going to be hard to predict, but in a matchup like this, it could happen. But this is supposed to be a slower-paced game. But really, there could be some opportunity for growth here and hit the over as well. But let me know in the comments below who you're starting, who you're grinding out in those lineups. Who's that random dude that you're putting in your lineup this week that makes you feel gross? Because we're all doing it. We all have a lineup here and there about every week, every few weeks that we're putting a guy out there starting that we don't feel good about it. And that's the fun part about fantasy football, is hoping those guys hit. I hope this helped you out. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button going forward because I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you with stashes, waiver wires. I'm here to give you off-the-wall things that you're not thinking of. That way we really get them gears going so we can start strategizing for this year and even next year because I'm here for you. Also, tap this video here for a running back that you might be able to get off waivers or trade for, and I could help you going forward that you might need right now. But I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.